The government said that economic growth was up in the third quarter. GDP increased by 2%. I'm Jill Schlesinger of CBS MoneyWatch. I'm joined by Jack Otter. And Jack, what's behind the growth this past quarter?
Well, the biggest contributor was consumer spending. Consumers finally opened their wallets a little bit. That was up 2%. But since that's 70% of the economy, that's a fairly big deal. Also, government spending was up. Federal government spending for the first time in 2 years. It jumped 9.6%. That was mostly defense spending. And then finally, the big number was the housing sector, up 14.4%, which sounds like a ton, but it's an example of just how bad housing has been, that contributed only a third of 1 percentage point to overall GDP. Normally, during a recovery, housing is something like 20% of our growth, but not at all this time. Now, also interesting, against all this fairly good consumer and housing news, business spending actually was down.
Yeah, this was interesting because I think businesses are holding back right now. They are much more attuned to the fiscal cliff, the combination of tax increases and government spending cuts that are due to take place in January. A lot of business leaders and a lot of fund managers are actually really hyper-focused on this and worried about it. I think also businesses are much more susceptible to global growth, which has been dropping. And if you look at our export number inside of the GDP, it was down. Not good for our manufacturers, not good for some of our multinational companies. But I wonder, in general, how is this going to play out on the campaign trail?
Sure. Well, both sides are already making hay. The Romney case is fairly easy. You say, look, 2%, that's not enough to get back to the job situation that we need. It's going to bring it down slightly perhaps, but we're at 7.8% unemployment. The Obama case is a little tougher to make, but he says, look, when I took office, GDP in that quarter was down 8.9%. Now we're up 2%. That's a pretty good spread. Personally, I think that the dirty secret that neither campaign can say is that really government policy has a lot less to do with what happens than the business cycle. We're in a really tough place right now, and probably only time will get us out.
Yes, that's what economists tell us. So Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff wrote this big manifesto about this. They looked at what happens to economies after big financial crises, like the one we just went through. And when they piled up all the data, they came up with a pretty sobering outcome. And that is, when you have a recession that comes along with a big fat banking or financial crisis, it often takes 7 to 10 years to get back where you were before you entered the crisis. So that means their clock would start back in December of 2007. So we're 5 years into the mission. We probably have somewhere between 2 to maybe another 5 years to go before we get back to where we were, regardless of who ends up in the White House come the election season.
Whoever wins, I can tell you this. They hope that your 2 to 5 years turns out to be about 3 years. That would be just perfect if you're running for office in the next election.
Well, keep it tuned here at CBSNews.com. For the next 12 days, we'll be covering the economy, politics, and don't forget next week, the last jobs report before the election. Thanks for watching.